Good morning, everyone. We are in Perek Bet of Sefer Daniel. We are moving back just a couple of psukim for the purpose of review. And if you recall, what had happened was Nebuchadnezzar had this dream. Based on this dream, he called together his advisors. He asked of the advisors two things. One is that they should tell him the dream, and two, they should tell him the explanation. The advisors said such a thing was impossible. No one could ever do such a thing, at which point Nebuchadnezzar became upset with them. Upset is an understatement, and said he's going to kill them all. He sent out his henchmen to start killing them, at which point Daniel goes and meets with the henchman and says, give me a chance. Let me see what's going on. Let me see if I can figure this out. He goes, meets with his three friends, and he says, let's daven. And the next day he reappears at Nebuchadnezzar's palace. And when he reappears, he's ready to give the explanation of the dream that all of the other people had not been able to give. And that's Posuk Lamed Vav of Perek Bet. Dana Chelma. This is the dream that you had, Ufishrei Ne'mar Kadam Malka, and its explanation, I'll say, before the king. Ant Malka Melech Malchaya. You are the king of all kings. It sounds almost like the way we describe HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but it stops a little short because he was the king over an empire, so he had other kings who were subjugated to him. Di Elah Shemaya Malchuta Chisna V'Tokva V'Yikara Yehavlach, who was given by the God of heavens your monarchy, your strength, and all of the honor that comes along with it. So right off the bat, he starts out by establishing the ground rules. You're really big, but you're not the ultimate. Uvechol di diran am posuk lamed chet b'nei anasha, and everywhere where people live, chevat brav ofei shmaya yahav biadach, the birds and the animals of the field are all in your control. Not yahav biadach, are given into your hands. V'hashletach b'chalhon, and your control is over all of them. Antu reishe di dahava. He says, now you, in this dream which you had, which began with a head that was made of gold, then a chest and hips that were made of silver, the chest of gold, the head of gold, the chest of silver, the upper, the hips and to the upper legs were made of bronze. The lower legs and the feet were made of a combination of both iron and clay. Says Daniel to Nebuchadnezzar, very wisely, but also because he had the explanation from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you are the head of gold. Uvatrach, and after you, tikum malchu achore araminach. And after you is going to rise another king who is below you. Ara, Rashi says, tachtona nemucha, lower than you are. Umalchu, and then tlita, there will be a third, achari dinachasha, who is going to be the nechoshet, and that person will be the bronze, the tishlat b'chol ara, who's going to still rule over all of the lands. Umalchu rivi'ah, and there will be then a fourth kingdom. Tehavi takifa keparzula. He is going to be powerful like barzel, like iron. You see, barzela and parzela, it's the same word. Kol kevel di parzela mahatek v'chashel kola. And just like iron can smash and crush everything, ucheparzela di mera'a kol ilan tadik v'teroa. And like that iron, he will crush and he will destroy. V'di chazyata raglaya ve'etzba'ata minhen, and then you saw the feet and the
Okay, it's the Wi-Fi that I should have pressed.
That's okay. You're good.
Okay, thank you, Don.
Uh-huh.
Okay. chasaf de pechar uminhon, and then those feet and the lower leg are going to be made of clay, umenhen parzel, and partially of iron. Why do you have the combination and what's the symbolism? Well, so far we know the symbolism is the head is gold. That's the most precious, the strongest, the best. Then you go to silver, secondary. Then you go to bronze, tertiary. Then you get down to the legs and the feet, which are a combination. That's going to be the lowest of levels that you're going to have. And why? Malchu pliga tahave. The reason why it's of two different materials is because the kingdom is going to be split. Uminitzpetati parzala lahaviva. It's going to be, however, firm and strong, like iron. Kol kevel di chazyata parzala mared b'chasaf tina. And because everything you saw is this combination of iron and pottery and clay. Ve'etzba'at raglaya, and the toes, minhen, parzel, some of the toes are made out of iron, uminhen chasaf, and some of them are going to be made from the clay. In other words, we're talking about the absolute final period of whatever this symbolism is going to be. Mingtzat malchuta tahavi takifa, uminat tahavi tvira. And the reason is, since you're going to have some toes made of clay and some toes made of iron, it means that some of those final years will be strong, like iron, and some of them will be weak, like clay. Di chazyata parzala ma'arav b'chasavtina, and the fact that you saw these two things mixed, the iron and the clay, mit arvin lahon bezera anasha. You need to know also that it's going to be a monarchy that has a combination of peoples. There are going to be different seeds of people. It's going to be an intermingled kind of nation. It's not going to be a nation of a single people, but of multiple peoples. And they're not going to be getting along so well one with the other. Just like steel and pottery don't mix well. They remain their independent identities. Uviyamehon di malchaya inon, and during those days of that final period, when you have both the toes made of either clay or of iron, Yakim Elah Shemaya, the God of the heavens will rise up. Dila almin lo titchabal, who will never will ever be destroyed. Umalchuta la'am achran lo tishtavik, and his monarchy will never be left alone. In other words, after this whole period we're talking about comes God. Tadik v'tasef ki kol ilain malchvata. He is going to destroy all of those monarchies before, the gold, the silver, the bronze, the iron, and the clay. V'takum lalmaya, and it will be risen up forever. This new malchut that God is going to be created will be an eternal monarchy. Now, where do we see this? And we'll see this in just a moment. We'll see this, if you remember, in the dream, and this we dealt with last week, that there was this boulder, this massive rock that had been thrown against the statue. And when it was thrown against the statue, it crushed the clay. And then it talked about how the whole statue disintegrated like chaff in a summer field, which is representative of God. And we'll see how it plays out. Kol kavel di chazyata di metora itgarzeret even. All of this is, you saw this, and you saw this happen because from a mountain had come this boulder, dilovi adain. It wasn't something that was done by hand. And it had crushed the iron, the nechoshet, the bronze, the pottery, the silver, and the gold. Elaka Rav Hoda Lamalka. And this is something the great king has told you, Nebuchadnezzar, Ma di lahave achrei dina. What's going to happen in the future after this? V'yatziv chelma, and this dream is true, or it will be fulfilled according to the Malbim. Umeheman pishra, and it is faithful. This explanation that I gave is faithful. As the Malbim says, Ki netzach Yisrael lo yishaker v'lo yinachem. We have a dream of 4 monarchs, each one lesser power than the next, and after those 4, along will come God, and God will destroy what was and establish a new kingdom. This is what we talk about, the fact being an Acharit Hayamim kind of dream. Now, if you still have from last week, I had given you a handout last week that looked like this. And in this handout, and I still think I have some extras for people who are here at least. For people who are here are some extras. Alita, if you, oh, there, you have it? Okay. Now, this handout has 2 pieces. First of all, it has at the bottom a chart. I'm just going to go over very briefly the chart. It's right here at the bottom. And the reason why the chart is, if you remember, we're dealing with 4 monarchies. And there is debate, who are these 4? The debate begins, for example, with an unusual place, and that is with the most recent of explanations, which is a Rav Yoel Ben Nun, who takes a very different approach than everybody else. And I can't say he's the only one who does this, but I do know that's the only one I've found like this. Rav Yoel Ben Nun is a very creative person in the way he explains things, and he isn't bothered when it isn't a halachic issue to offer some innovative approach. And what he talks about is that all 4 of this, and this is the last column, are actually tied into the monarchies, the kings of Babylon. And so if you look at the last column, he talks about that the first king is Nebuchadnezzar. That's the head of gold. But then the silver, he says, is Nebuchadnezzar's son, Avil Merodach. Then he says the one who is bronze is Nergal Shar Etzar. All of these we know who they are. These are the kings of Babylon. Followed by the iron, who's Nebuchadnezzar, followed by ultimately this final stage of things that are falling apart. And this is actually the final king before the Persian Empire conquers the Babylonian Empire, and that's Belshazzar. So he says this is really the Acharit Hayamim vision of Nebuchadnezzar, and its explanation of Daniel, according to Rav Yoel Ben Nun, is actually a vision and an explanation that is just talking about the Babylonian Empire. That's it. Now, the rest of the explanations I have follow a different approach, and the approach they follow is that it's actually talking about all world history, and we're actually talking about the literal end of days. And so it begins with a Medrash Tanchuma, which I have at the top of this page. And he just mentions, Daniel Daniel saw all 4 of these kingdoms and he was afraid. Shneimar, Itkarit Ruchi Ana Daniel, because it says, when it says that Daniel, what did you see? Umaya Daniel Ro'el Kevan Shara Nebuchadnezzar Tachalom, but Daniel Bao Patarlo Amarlo. He says, however, when Nebuchadnezzar, he didn't want to get involved in it, Daniel, but when Nebuchadnezzar came to him and said, he's going to explain it, Amarlo, Antu Reisha di Dahava, you're the head, you're the gold. V'chadvei v'droi di Kesef, and then the next comes the silver, Zomachut Bavel. It's the monarchy in general of the Babylonians, which was founded by Nebuchadnezzar. Uvatruch takum malchu achrei araminach, and then comes the lower level, mahoi v'archeteti nachash, which is made of bronze where the stomach and the hips are of bronze. O Malchut Madai, those are the Medes. Umalchut Litai, and then comes the third empire, Achrei Dinachasha, the Tashlit Bechol Aro, is going to rule over the world, and it's not literally the world, but over a large portion of the ancient world. Shakoi Di Parzel, which is going to be the iron, and that is Malchut Yavan, the Greeks. Umalchut Revi'ah Hava Takifa Keparzela, and this last group is going to be strong. Raglaya Menhan. Parzel Menhon Chasev. However, it's going to be a combination of iron and pottery. Zo Edom. That's the Roman Empire. Lama Nimshala Bebarzel V'Cheres. Why is the Roman Empire both a combination of iron and pottery? Amru Rabotenu Hamalchut Harashah Zoi Atida Lishtamesh B'Matbea Shel Cheres. In the future, said Chazal, they're going to use coins of pottery. And that's why we're mentioning the pottery. Another reason why they could be compared to this combination of iron and pottery. Just like iron is hard, just like the monarchy will be hard. And it's also referred to cheres because in the future God will shatter it like cheres. V'ra'a Melech HaMashiach, and he also saw the Melech HaMashiach, Shenemar, Chazeh Avyat Adit, Gazart Evan, etc. He said, I also saw this rock which came to crush everything. Amarish Lakish Zo Melech HaMashiach, he saw the Mashiach, Umachet Litzalme Al Ragloi, and he went ahead and he smashed the feet of the statue. L'chol HaMalchuyot Shem Netunot B'Tzelem. All of the monarchies that are around. Yeah, Leah.
I would think Rome would also be associated with clay because and iron because the Romans built they were known as builders and they also were known for statues and gods.
Well, the Babylonians did pretty well also. If Babylonians,
built infrastructure.
but so did Babylonians did also. The city of Bavel was this magnificent city, large city with walls, with all sorts of structures as well. The Romans took it to the next step. There's no question about it. But that next step that they took it to was also part of the innovations of the years. Yeah, you're right. Oh, let me get to this. So on the chart, if you look at the bottom of the chart, the Medrash, the first column from the second column from the right says, just like the Medrash, Nebuchadnezzar, Bavel, Paras, Madai, Yavan, Edom, right? So Nebuchadnezzar is the head of gold. Then you have the Babylonians, then you have the Persian Medes, then you have the Greeks, and then you have the Romans. The Ibn Ezra says Nebuchadnezzar, Bavel, Paras, Madai, Yavan, Edom, and he has the Arabs, Yishmael, as the last empire that's going to be destroyed. The Reb Sajagon has Nebuchadnezzar, Bavel, Paras, Madai, Yavan, Edom, and Yishmael. He puts the two together, the Romans and the Arabs. Rav Meidan is troubled by this combination of people. Remember, the feet are made of both clay and iron. Well, if I take the Medrash, Edom, you have to say that Edom is made of clay and iron. One monarchy is made of two. If you look at Reb Sajagon, he says, actually, no, there are two empires ruling simultaneously, the Arabs and the Romans, and those are the two groups. Now, we can see that in history, by the way, depending on where we are in history, okay, but you had the two empires actually that met on the Iberian Peninsula for the great battles over Spain, southern Spain originally being Arab, northern Spain being Christian, and ultimately those great battles that took place where the Arabs retreated back to northern Africa itself. You could see that. Rav Meidan is very creative. He says it's the Seleucid and Ptolemean empires. Okay, Seleucid and Ptolemean empires, meaning that this is the post-Greek. Okay, Seleucid and Ptolemean, remember we have the northern Greeks and the southern Greeks, the Egyptian Greeks and the Syrian Greeks. So for instance, our battle at Hanukkah was against the Syrian Greeks. Okay, we weren't against all of the Greek Empire, even though we normally put it into Yavan. What part of the reason and part of the challenge that Rav Meidan is also dealing with was Edom in the consciousness at that moment or not? Some suggest that it may be too far ahead, and it does play into other pieces, which we'll see in Sefer Daniel. but this is definitely one of those dreams that talks about some kind of end of days. According to Rav Yoel ben Nun, the end of days is the end of the Babylonian Empire. Done. According all the rest, really, the end of the days is talking about a Melech Mashiach kind of period, and where the Melech Mashiach pops in, we have these different explanations of who each of these empires could represent. I find, by the way, fascinating both the Ibn Ezra and the Rav Saadia Gaon, because in the Ibn Ezra, if you remember where all of these people lived, Ibn Ezra is in an Arab empire, right? So he has Yavan Edom. Well, as far as he's concerned, he's living at a time, and I'm not saying that everything he said is fully driven by his experience, but he's living in a time where the Arabs are on the rise. And it may be that the Ibn Ezra saw that perhaps the Roman Empire was on the decline from his perspective. Reb Saadia Gaon, interestingly, saw them equally. Reb Saadia Gaon is living in Bavel, and he saw them equally as well. If we look at our time, it may be that we're seeing something equal between the Roman Empire and the Arab empires that are going on. I don't know where we might classify these different pieces, but this is what he does. So Daniel has this, so Nebuchadnezzar has this dream. Daniel explains the dream. It is an end of days kind of dream. And then the reaction to it is amazing. But Edayin, then Malka Nebuchadnezzar nefal al anpoi. Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face. Ula Daniel Segid, and he bowed down to Daniel. Umincha v'nichochin amar l'nesachale, and he said to offer offerings to him, to offer libations and flower offerings to Daniel. In other words, his reaction is that he went and he assumed, and this is the Medrash, Daniel talks about this, and other Midrashim as well, he assumed that Daniel was a god. To be able to explain this was beyond his understanding. Reb Saadia Gaon says, no, he didn't think that. Reb Saadia Gaon says, this is just pure honor he's extending to him. But again, it's hard to imagine that a king of such power would give such great honor to the other person. In Breshit Rabbah, they actually talk about the fact that Daniel doesn't deny, it doesn't say, don't offer anything to me. There's this moment where things are happening. And as a result, it actually says that this is the moment where Daniel makes a mistake, sins, and his punishment is going to be thrown into the lion's den because of this, because he should have immediately stopped Nebuchadnezzar. Anei Malka, Lida, you had a question?
No.
Okay. Anei Malka le Daniel. Now the king speaks, Ve'amar, and he says, Min kishot de elokachon hu elokah. It is true, kishot means emet, that your Elohim, your God, is God. Elokan umarei malchin v'galei razin. He is the God, I'm sorry, Elokah Elokim. He's the God of gods, umarei malchin, and the master of kings, v'galei razin, and he reveals the secrets. Diachelta lemigle razadina, because you've been able to go ahead and explain this dream. Now, what caused, according to the approach that Nebuchadnezzar thought that Daniel was a god, what caused him all of a sudden to accept God as God? So the Mitzvot David says that because Daniel didn't want to accept this, and Daniel didn't accept it at some point after, in between these two psukim, he says that Nebuchadnezzar says, don't think that I'm denying your God. Your God is the real God. I'm just giving you this kavod as well. Reb Saadia Gaon says that when he saw that Daniel didn't want to accept this, he said, okay, I accept. You're not God, but that's the God. So just a question of what the motivation was with Nebuchadnezzar when he's making these statements to Daniel. Adayin Malka le Daniel Rabbi, and at that point, the king made Daniel great, Umatnan Ravavan, and he gave him many gifts, Sagin, many of them, Yahavle, that were given to him. Vahashlate al kol medinat Bavel, and he gave him rule over all of Bavel. V'rav Signin, and he made him over all of the Skanim. All over Skanim is actually an Akkadian word. We now use it like a deputy, right? So he made him the Rav to all of the Skanim. He had middle management. It was him, middle management. Well, he just put Daniel in between. Al kol chakimei Bavel, over all of the wise men of Bavel. V'Daniel. Daniel ba'amin malka, umani al avidata, and Daniel asked from the king, and he asked him to be placed over the work di medinat Bavel, of the nation of Bavel, l'shadrach, meshach, v'Abednego. He asked that his three compatriots, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, should be given important jobs. V'Daniel bitra malka, and Daniel was sitting, as the Ibn Ezra says, in the Shar HaMelech. Daniel was the highest of all of them. We understand why, because of this role he took in explaining the dream. But Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were also given important court positions to fulfill. And that's the dream, and that's the first interaction we have between Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar in a meaningful fashion, as opposed to what we first had in the introductory chapter. Now we come to the second parak, not the third parak. The third parak, and today I'm going to try to keep a better eye on time so we don't have strange stops along the way. The third parak is the first time in all of Tanakh that we ever find a person willing to die al Kiddush Hashem. Before that, we haven't had that experience taking place. It is a case where Daniel, Avram and Yitzchak, if you think about it, Avram and Yitzchak over the Kiddush, let me rephrase it, Kiddush Hashem in the sense of someone else threatening that you have to do something over a mitzvah. Yitzchak was a passive participant in that sense at the Akedah. Avraham, the story of the Kivshan Ha'esh with Nimrod, of the fiery furnace with Nimrod, is a medrash. In Tanakh, someone refusing to do something and willing to forfeit his life for that, we really don't find it anywhere. This is the very first case. And which, by the way, when you think about it, is kind of fascinating, because we sort of think this is happening throughout, but any of those explanations we may have had are all based on Midrashim. This is the first explicit text in Tanakh to this extent. What happens in this case, and just to explain what's going to be going on in this parak, Nebuchadnezzar is going to build a statue. We don't know if this statue is actually an idol or if the statue is just a monument. The difference, obviously, is what people do for the statue. If you bow down to a monument, it has a different meaning than bowing down to an idol. The Gemara, and this is the first handout that I gave you, the one that starts at the top of the page. And you'll see from the Gemara in Psachim a little bit of an explanation on this, where we're coming from. The Gemara in Psachim talks about Todos Ish Romi. There was a Jew in Rome named Theodos, and Theodos taught the following piece. Hananiah, Mishael, va'Azariah, shemasru atzman al kedushat Hashem lekivshan ha'esh. Explain to me for a moment why Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, who will be in this chapter, why they were willing to give up their life al Kiddush Hashem and be thrown into the fiery furnace.
Could you post it?
I posted it last night, yes.
Yeah, but could you show it on the screen now? Screen share?
Hold on a moment. Let me see if I can do it quickly. Okay. If I can do it quickly, I will do so. Excuse me a moment. Let me see if I can do it quickly. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
It's the one that doesn't have anything on the other back.
Okay. Here is the source Od Zodarash Todos Ish Romi Mara'u. In other words, why was it that they were willing to sacrifice their lives? Chananya, Mishael, V'Azariah, Shemasrun Atzman Al Kedushat Hashem Lekivshana Eish. Why were they willing to sacrifice their lives and be thrown into the fiery furnace? Nasu Kal V'Chomer Batzmam Mitzvardeim. They actually did a Kal V'Chomer. They had a logical construct that they used from the frogs of Egypt. Frogs who have no obligation to give their lives if they have to do something, if they have to worship Avodah Zarah, and obviously this is a bit fanciful. Okay. Tivbahu, it's written, that the frogs are going to come into your homes, uvetanurecha uvamisharotecha, that they're going to be in your ovens and they're going to be in your kneading troughs where you knead the dough. When do you knead dough and when is the dough next to an oven? It's only when you've already heated up the oven to be able to bake the bread. So as a result, the frogs threw themselves, not that they were in cold ovens, teaches us Theodos, but they threw themselves into ovens that were hot. They died for the sake of this makkah of the plague in Egypt. Anu shemitzuvim al kedushat Hashem. Therefore, says Theodos, we who have a mitzvah of dying al kiddush Hashem, alachat kama v'kama. How much more so do we have to throw ourselves into a fiery furnace? That's the Gemara in Psachim. Tosfot there asks the question. It starts out, Mara'u Chananya, Mishael, v'Azariah. What did Chananya, Mishael, and Azariah, what did they see? What did they understand when they went ahead and were willing to die al kiddush Hashem in the fiery furnace? Piresh HaKuntras explained Rashi on these words that what this really means, Mara'u shelo darshu v'chai b'hem v'lo shi'amut b'hem. Why didn't they say we have an obligation of v'chai b'hem? We have to live in Torah and not die in Torah. Why were they willing to give their lives for this? V'kasha, it's problem. The habafar hesya hava. This was in public. Umaskinam b'Sanhedrin, and we learn in the Gemara in Sanhedrin, the kulei alma b'farhesia chayav limtzor atzmo afilu amitzvah kala. And the problem I have with Rashi is Rashi says that they should have been able to live, and yet we have a principle that when we normally talk about a person dying al kiddush Hashem for the big three mitzvot, right? For murder, for Gilui Arayot, for immoral sexual practice, or for Avodah Zarah, those three scenarios where we say a person has to give their life, Rashi says, well, why did Chananya, Mishael, and Azariah want to give their life? So they had to give a whole drasha, the frogs. Says the Tosfot, but wait a second, the big three only apply when it's in private. If in public, a ruler were to say, you have to eat a cheeseburger, then you have to give your life and not eat the cheeseburger. The cheeseburger is not Avodah Zarah, it's not Gilui Arayot, and it's not Shvichut Damim. So why does Rashi even ask the question? Why would Rashi say that they need a basis for it? Umefaresh Rabbeinu Tam, and so Rabbeinu Tam explains, Ditzelem zeh shasa Nebuchadnezzar. This statue that we're going to be talking about, Lav Avodah Zarah Hava. This wasn't idolatry. Ela indarta. It was an andarta. In the modern Hebrew, we use the word andarta. It's a memorial. There are andartas all over Israel, unfortunately, memorials to war heroes, to things. It's some kind of statue. Shas alichvod atzmo. That Nebuchadnezzar made a statue in his honor. Ulakach ka'amar. And that's why Rashi, according to Rabbeinu Tam, has to explain Mara, or what did they see to give up their lives? Because they weren't giving up their lives. This doesn't seem so clear to be something they should have to do. Bow down to a memorial, big deal. Where they said, to your God we're not going to serve, and to your golden image we're not going to bow. Mashma de elaha dideu letzalma tremilininu, which means, says later on, we'll see this pasuk where they say, we're not going to bow down to your statue, and we're not going to bow down to your God. That must mean that the statue is not a God. So Rabbeinu Tam explains, this statue that's being built and being discussed here is not a God. It is some kind of monument to the glory, think North Korea, think China, to the glory of the ruler himself. And since it's a monument, maybe they should be able to bow down. So they said, no, you know what? We can't bow down, even because we learned this from the frogs. Continues the Gemara, Va'atinami shaper hadamrina be'elu narot. And this actually now makes sense. What is written in the Gemara in Ketubot, Ilmale nagdo lechananya Mishael v'Azariah palchu letzalmei v'avodah zarah hava chas v'shalom ashu mishtachavim lo umihu lashon palchu lo ati shaper. And it says ultimately there they were worshiping. And how's it possible to worship it? Because obviously it's not an idol. V'ri. And the Ri, who is one of the later Tosafists, okay, Rabbi Yitzchak ben Shmuel Azaken Midampierre, he was in France. Mefaresh Mara'u, what Rashi means, what does it look? Shelo Barchu. Why didn't they immediately run away? In other words, why did they make a stand? If Nebuchadnezzar is going to tell everybody you have to bow down, and let's assume for a minute this is an idol, you can run away. You can run away and keep your life. So why didn't they run away? Like Daniel ran away. And we see in a different Gemara that when this all went on, Daniel wasn't in Bavel, so he isn't part of this story. So there's a machloket in the Tosfot of what's going to happen in this chapter. Is this chapter a story where he establishes an idol and they refuse to bow down to the idol? Well, I understand why they refuse. Or is this the case of just a statue and they refuse? If I don't know, if the mayor makes a new rule that every time you go to Daily Plaza, you have to bow down to the Picasso, you don't have to give your life for that. Okay, I don't know. You don't have to go to, but you also don't have to go down to Daily Plaza. And here, these men, why did they put themselves in the situation? So that's the tension that is appearing here. The bottom piece at the bottom is from the Medrash that Daniel went ahead and he ran away and he went somewhere else. And you can read that in either the English or the Hebrew. But let's now go into the parak itself. The parak says as follows: Unebuchadnezzar Malka, and to Nebuchadnezzar the king, Avad Tselem Didahav. He made an idol of gold. Now, again, we have this machloket. The machloket is not just between Rabbeinu Tam and the Ri Midampierre, but it's also in later, in other commentaries, Reb Saadia Gaon, and then relatively modern times, the Malbim, both say that this was merely a memorial, some kind of statue to himself. The Gemara, the Mitzudot David, follows that it was Avodah Zarah. Yeah, Meira.
Sorry to interrupt. Why? This seems like there's a strong comparison between this and Mordechai and Haman.
Yes.
And?
Yes. We find, well, first of all, we find this in a lot of places. We see all sorts of parallels in the stories, for example, the last parak between Daniel and Yosef, right? Here we're going to see, we immediately think of Haman and Mordechai, where Haman is wearing some kind of avodah zarah. And again, that's a machloket. We have a similar machloket. Why won't he bow down to Haman? The Gemara says because he made himself into avodah zarah by wearing an amulet that had the avodah zarah in it. He was trying to test the Jews. Okay, so all of those things were going on at the same time. We see these parallels. Now, by the way, the parallels are not necessarily because they are the same stories and versions of them. But remember, Mordechai is Persia. Persia is the successor nation to Bavel. So you find the same kinds of issues that are arising from one empire to the next empire. It just, we're so familiar. If we read Daniel in Shul every year, and we only read Megillat Esther when we were learning it in the Tanakh, we would ask the question the other way around. is Megillat Esther similar to Daniel? Here it's only because Daniel we're not as familiar with it. Okay, just what immediately calls it out. Yeah.
Why don't you make a statue and it's of a person and then you tell people to bow down? Doesn't that sort of turn the statue into an idol? It's not like just
Well-
it's not a person anymore. It's an actual idol and you're bowing to, I don't know. sort
You know,
of making of
but
an idol.
let me, and it's, we see this though, in terms of matters of respect, and this is lahavdil elef havdalot, okay? Lahavdil elef havdalot, if you go to Yad Vashem, in the Valley of the Communities, okay? Or if you go through the Children's Memorial, you know that you're supposed to be quiet and it's a somber mood, not just because of what you're going to, but you know when you walk in, there's a certain level of respect that's necessary. Now, lahavdil elef havdalot, when they make a statue of themselves, when these despotic rulers make statues of themselves, they expect that level of honor and glory extended to those images of themselves. You saw it even in communist Russia. And if you remember, in fact, we just, again, a bunch of lahavdils. But what we even had it recently in the United States, the tearing down of memorials. Okay, it's a statue. Who cares, right? But you tear down memorials. Now you had the same thing at the fall of the Soviet Union, where the Stalin and Lenin statues were coming down all over the place, because until that point you had a certain amount of kavod you had to have for them. So the fact of bowing, for us, bowing is limited. If you think about it, bowing is limited for us to religious experiences. But if I'm around monarchs, I'm bowing all the time. And so to bow to a statue doesn't necessarily mean worship. It can mean honor. And see, both approaches are reasonable. And both approaches work throughout the story. The interesting thing, which I went over quickly in terms of the Tosafot, where he talks about the fact that when you're aware of that one pasuk, which we'll come to later in this parak, where Daniel says, I'm not bowing down to this golden statue and I'm not bowing down to your God. Well, it could be a reiteration, which means the statue is your God, or it could be distinguishing. I'm not bowing down to this, and I'm not going to bow to, by the way, I'm not bowing down to your God either. Okay. And according to the Rabbeinu Yitzchak, he has to say that it's a distinction between the two. It's a vav hamechalek between them, because ultimately he's saying it's just an andarta. It's just this statue. Nebuchadnezzar Malka Avad Salem Didahav. So Nebuchadnezzar makes this statue, this golden statue. Ruma Amin Shitin. It is 60 amot tall. Petei Amin Shit. And it is 6 amot wide. Now, we don't have any engineers here, okay? But if you're an engineer and you build something 60 tall and 6 wide, there's no way this thing is going to stand. And believe it or not, there's some discussion in the Meforshim of how it was able to stand, because it's just a tall, skinny nothing. Okay. Akimei bevikat Dura, and it was put up in Bikat Dura. Bikat Dura is a valley that's about 8 kilometers south of the city of Bavel, B'medinat Bavel, in the country of Bavel. Nebuchadnezzar Malka, and Nebuchadnezzar the king, shlach lemichnash, and he sent out to gather, lemichnas is to lachnis, to bring in the same word, the shin and a sin are mitchalfim, can interchange. Lachashtar panaya, to bring in the achashtar panim, a word we know from Megillat Esther. Achashtar panim are satraps. Okay, it's actually a Persian word as well. Skinaya, which we know is an Akkadian word, a skan or a perfect. It's different kinds of ministers. Pachvata, and to bring in the pachot in modern English, we have the word pasha. Think of India. Okay, they're governors. Adar Gazraya, and to bring in the Adar Gazraya. Now, we're really not sure. Ibn Ezra says we don't really know what this role is. Rashi actually says it's an avodah zarah. But the Dat Mikra says, wait a second. this actually comes from a Persian word, and they are advisors. Gedavraya is also a Persian word, but the Persian word, I'm sorry, an Aramaic word, but the Aramaic word is the Daled and Zion are mitchalfim, a gizbar, the people who were responsible over taxes. The Tavraya, and to bring in the Tavraya, this is judges. It's again an Aramaic word. Tiftaye, and also to bring in Tiftaye. Reb Sajigon says Tiftaye were the people who were the gatekeepers over the fiery furnace. The Medrash Shmuel says no. Tiftaye were the officers who were making sure that everyone worshipped the right kind of God. This is like the inquisitors almost. These are the religion police. V'chol shiltonei medinata, and all of the rest of the people who govern the land, lemeite lechanukat tzalma, to come for the dedication ceremony of this statue. Came Nebuchadnezzar Malka, which Nebuchadnezzar had put up. Badayin, then mitkanshin, they all come together. Ashtar Chapanaya, Skinaya, Pachvata, Gazraya, Gedavraya, the Tavraya, Tiftei, the whole Shiltonei Medinata leChanukat Tzalma, they all showed up for the dedication ceremonies. King Nebuchadnezzar Malka, which Nebuchadnezzar had put up, and the Kaimin leKavel Tzalma, King Nebuchadnezzar, which Nebuchadnezzar, had the. They were standing opposite. They were standing right by the statue. V'chroza karabachayil, and then Nebuchadnezzar makes this powerful statement. Chayil is not just a soldier, lo b'chayil v'lo b'koach, right? L'chon namrin namamaya. Okay, I am telling you, nations, umaya, and people. Now the difference, interesting, Tzadok David says an am is a nation that has religion and a God. And Ummah is a group of people that is not religiously organized. Vilishanaya, and people of all the different languages, okay? Di tishma'un, when you hear the following sounds, kol karna, the sound of the keren, I'm going to show you pictures of everything in a minute, mashrokita, and you'll hear the sound of the mashrokita, which is a kind of flute. You're going to hear the katros. The katros, interestingly, is a kithara, which was a kind of harp, but kithara morphed into a guitar. It's the same word. If you switch the K sound with a G sound, guitarra becomes a guitarra. Okay. Shabcha, and you have, the sabcha. The sabcha is a psaltery, it's called. It's another kind of harp. Psanterin, modern Hebrew is a psanter, is a piano. But this is psanterin. It seems to be a kind of a harp. It's still there's a machlok. It's interesting. Sajigon says it's a kind of a drum. The Medrash Shmuel suggests that it's actually cymbals. He says they're two brass or bronze things you strike together. Sumponia, the same word as symphony, if you see. Interesting. The Aruch says sumponia are bagpipes. V'chol zanei zamra, and all kinds of instruments. When you hear the instruments playing, tiplun, fall down, v'tiskedun l'tzelem dava, and bow down to the golden image, di'ekim Nebuchadnezzar Malka, which Nebuchadnezzar put up. Uman dilo yipel v'yiskud, and whoever doesn't fall down and bow down, basha'ata yitramei, at that moment, right then, if they don't do it, I'm going to lift them up. Lego atun nura yekedata. I'm going to throw them into the fiery furnace, the furnace that is burning. Now, before we get into the burning furnace, there's a new edition of Tanakh with Steinsaltz's commentary to it. It was finished before he passed away. It is very nice, but he also has, like Steinsaltz did with the Talmud, he has pictures. So just the Keren, in fact, he says, is not a shofar. it's some kind of horn. He suggests it's like this round shaped horn that's up here. And you've seen them in old Cecil B. DeMille pictures. Okay, it's a round shaped horn. When he talks about the Mishrokita, he says it's it's the double flute. What was the name of the imp in a Midsummer Night's Dream?
Pan.
Pan. Yeah. So it's like Pan's. It's a pan flute. It's a double flute. He suggests not just a plain Khalil. The Katros. Okay. We mentioned about the Savcha he says, is this picture down here, which is referred to as a sambuki. I have no idea what it is, but it's a kind of a harp. And then finally, you have the psanterin, which is another kind of harp, which is over here that he shows. Okay, so Steinsaltz has these explanations. We know he builds the statue. Whoever doesn't bow down to it is going to get thrown into the fiery furnace, Pasuk Zion, and let's see what goes on. Kol kavel, denave zimna kedei shemaim. Right away, when you hear this, kol amai, all the nations, kal karna mishrakita, katros, sabcha, psanteri, v'chol zamara, and all the musical instruments, noflin al kol amamaya, umaya v'lashanaya, sagdin l'tzel medava, diakim nebuchadnezzar malka. They all fall down. Kol kavel dena, bezimna krivu guvrin kasdain. But at that moment, come a group of Babylonians, vachalu kartseon diudaya, and they go ahead and they accuse the Jews. Achalu kartseon literally means they take a bite out of the Jews. Okay, they pieces of the Jews, and they tell Nebuchadnezzar, Anova Amri Nebuchadnezzar Malka Al Machaya, we say to them, may you live forever, Nebuchadnezzar. Ant Malka Sam Ta'im Dichol Enash. You put a command in for the whole world. The Ishma Kol Karna Mishrikota Ketros Sabcha Psanterin Simpaya V'chol Zanei Zamari Yipol Yizkod L'Tzalma D'Dava. You said as soon as this music starts playing, everyone's got to bow down. Uman Delo Yipol Yizkod. And whoever doesn't bow down, doesn't fall down and bow down, Yitramei L'Go Atu Nur Kedata, will be thrown into the fiery furnace. Itai Guvrin Yudain. There are these Jews, these people, the Manita Yaton al Avidat Medinat Bavel, who you put in an important place over Bavel. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. Guvraya Ilach Lo Samu Allah Malkaten. These people are not following your rules. Lelo Hach Lo Palchin. They don't worship your God. Uletzelem Dahava Dihekimta. Lo Sagidin, and they're not bowing down to this golden statue that you built. Now, does it mean they're not worshiping your God? Like, by the way, with Haman, with Achashverosh. Remember that right? That their religion is different, and they're not bowing down. Or does it mean that they're not worshiping your God, and you see it because they're not bowing down? So they're coming to accuse the Jews of sedition. And they're specifically picking the three people who Nebuchadnezzar had put up into position and said, Nebuchadnezzar, you're in trouble. And with this, we're going to end. We'll pick it up next. We'll pick it up in 2 weeks. I'm actually headed off to Israel today, and I will be back. I'm missing next Sunday. I'll be back in a week. 2 Sundays, we'll have shir again. Everyone have a wonderful day.